Hello, I'm Dr. Matt Helmers with Iowa State University, Director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center and Professor in the Department of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering. Today we're going to talk about some of our edge of field practices that we can use to reduce downstream nitrate delivery to water bodies so that we can hopefully have cleaner water in our streams and in our lakes throughout Iowa and the upper Midwest. Okay, today we're at the conservation station on the edge, one of the trailers that the Iowa Learning Farms has that we can use for educational programs throughout the state and the region. If some of the information is interesting here, if you see something and would like this at an event in the future, I'd encourage you to get in touch with the Iowa Learning Farms. Throughout the upper Midwest, we have a lot of naturally poorly drained soils. So throughout the last 120 years, we've installed an artificial subsurface drainage network that takes water away from those systems to enhance crop production. So this is kind of illustrates that tile drainage network, artificial subsurface drainage network that we might see in the field. It helps us lower the water table to allow air back into that plant root zone for crop production. So it's very important and enhances crop production. But one of the things and side effect is that water that leaves the plant root zone many times in a lot of cases is high in nitrate, and that gets delivered directly to downstream water bodies. So, but at least in these cases, we know where it's coming out, and so some of the things that we can do to reduce that ultimate nitrate delivery is we can use some of the edge of field practices that we'll talk about today. We always want to do the best job we can in field with good nutrient management, the 4 R's of nutrient management, things like cover crops and diverse crop rotation. We want to do everything we can to reduce the nitrate that's lost from the plant root zone. But once it is lost from the plant root zone in our drained landscapes, it's intercepted by those drainage systems and taken to the stream, and we want to do something to reduce that downstream nitrate delivery. So the first edge of field practice we're going to talk about for reducing downstream nitrate delivery is our saturated buffer. So again, we're going to route or capture that water that's coming down our drainage system and try to clean that before it gets to the stream. So with this one, we have that water coming through our drainage system from the field. This illustrates that water or that drain coming from our field. We put a control structure in so that we can divert a portion of that water flow below a buffer zone. So we have this control structure. We put a tile line on the upstream edge or leading edge of that buffer so that we can promote shallow groundwater flow below the buffer to allow opportunity for removal of nitrate, primarily through denitrification from some of the work that's been done. So one of the things that we'll turn on the water here, and you'll be able to see that water start to flow a little bit into that saturated buffer. So again, coming from the field, portion of that is routed to that upstream edge of the buffer. One of the things with this practice though is that we're not going to be able to route all of that water to the saturated buffer, so we do have a bypass for high flow events so that it's not negatively impacting the drainage for the producer in the upfield area. So relative to results from this practice, some of the work has shown that that water that we're putting in on the upstream edge of the buffer, by the time it gets to our stream, we've removed all of that nitrate. But again, we can't route all of that water in many cases through that buffer zone. So while we might get complete nitrate removal there, we do have some bypass flow. So overall, if you take that into account, some of the work has shown 40 to 60% reduction in downstream nitrate delivery. So now there are a few things to consider with this practice. One is we need to have this zone where that shallow water table is moving relatively rich in carbon to help promote denitrification. So that would be a limitation, is we have to have kind of the right soils in those locations. We wouldn't want, for example, sands and gravels, because that would short circuit that water flow, so we wouldn't get the retention time and opportunity for denitrification. And then one other thing is, this is going to be situated next to the stream. We're promoting some shallow groundwater flow. We would not want to have a case where, because of this shallow groundwater flow, we create a seepage face on that stream that might create some erosion problems. So This can work in a lot of places next to streams where we have subsurface drainage, but there would be some limitations that it's not going to work everywhere. But there are many, probably hundreds of thousands of miles of buffer throughout the upper Midwest that could benefit from a saturated buffer type design to reduce downstream nitrate delivery. Okay, the next practice that we're going to talk about for removing nitrate from our drainage water is a denitrifying bioreactor. So in this case, again, similar to the saturated buffer, we're going to intercept that drainage flow. One of the differences between the saturated buffer and bioreactor, the saturated buffer, we need to be next to a stream. With our denitrifying bioreactor, we don't. So this probably has more fields where this might be applicable, but there's some differences and maybe a little more maintenance with this practice. So again, we have that water coming from the field. We have a control structure in this case that we're going to divert a portion of that water flow into a wood chip bioreactor. Really, we're using the wood chips as a carbon media so that bacteria can transform nitrate to primarily dinitrogen gas, and they need the carbon from the wood chips as well. These wood chips bioreactors might be on the order of 20 to 25 foot wide, 100 foot long, maybe 3 foot deep full of wood chips. So we're talking about quite a few wood chips. We want pretty clean wood chips, not a mulch material, and certainly not a case where we have a lot of leaves in there. As with the saturated buffer, we have that control structure so that there are going to be some times when we can't route all that water flow into the bioreactor. You know, we might want to route at least 15% of the peak flow, and that might get us 70 to 80% of the annual flow through the bioreactor. But there are going to be periods when we have to bypass some of that water flow that we just can't route it in there. When we take into account both the water that goes through the bioreactor as well as the water that bypasses, we might get on the order of a 40% nitrate reduction in what's delivered downstream. So again, a pretty effective practice. But with this one, probably a little more expensive than the saturated buffer. We have to excavate a trench. We have to put in a couple control structures here. We have to fill it with wood chips, obviously, which can be a challenge. And then at some point in time, we're going to consume the carbon from those wood chips. So it might be 10 or 15 years. We have to come back, excavate that, and probably put new wood chips in there. Now, some folks are looking at different carbon media, like corn cobs. Could be very effective, but may not last as long. Should also note we have a downstream control structure here as well that we can use to kind of control that outlet level or control the water level in the bioreactor so that we could control the retention time. So the removal of nitrate is really a function of how long that water is in the bioreactor. By adjusting the outlet level of the downstream control structure, we may be able to impact the nitrate removal of this system. Both the bioreactor and the saturated buffer are probably best used in situations where we have about 100-acre drainage area. So they're what I would say is a field level practice. There would be some other more multiple field or small watershed level edge of field denitrifying practices such as wetlands or multi-purpose oxbows. But both the saturated buffer and bioreactor are going to be a little bit more field scale practices for nitrate removal. So hopefully talking through the saturated buffer and the bioreactor gives you an idea of two practices that we can use to reduce downstream nitrate delivery from our row crop land throughout the upper Midwest. I think they can be very effective, and so I'd encourage you to look into these practices and see if they might work on your land. We need to be proactive in getting these practices out there so that we can have cleaner water both locally for our lakes and rivers, as well as we think about more regionally to the Gulf of Mexico.